A sharp new war of words erupts between NATO and Moscow, and the stakes are rising fast. Russia accused NATO chief of manufacturing excuses for direct military intervention in Ukraine as fears of a wider conflict grip Europe. Russian lawmaker Leonid Slutsky has launched a blistering attack on Mark Rutte, accusing him of deliberately misleading the public. Slutsky says Rutte's claim that Europe may deploy troops to Ukraine if Russia violates a future peace deal is a fabricated pretext to justify NATO's entry into the war. Writing on Telegram, Slutsky warned that sending NATO forces into Ukraine would amount to maintaining what he called an enemy stronghold near Russia's borders. He reiterated Moscow's long-standing position: any NATO military contingent deployed to Ukraine would be considered a legitimate target for Russian forces. Slutsky stressed that such plans are not peace-oriented, warning they would only prolong and expand the conflict rather than address its root causes. Earlier, Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said Moscow is ready to formally confirm it has no intention of attacking either the European Union or the US-led NATO. On Friday, Russian President Vladimir Putin rebuffed Western claims about purported Russian plans to attack European nations.
In the new security strategy, NATO's national security strategy, Russia is not designated as an enemy, as a target.
But the NATO Secretary General, it is preparing for war with us. What is this? Can't you read? How can you possibly insist on NATO targeting Russia for war if the main country in NATO doesn't even consider us an adversary or an enemy?
European political elites supported the Democratic Party, Ms. Harris, in the United States presidential elections. They did this quite directly, if not to say brazenly, yet they once accused Trump of Russia interfering in the elections.
Absolutely nothing was ever confirmed. All the extensive investigations carried out by Congress yielded absolutely nothing. There was no evidence of any cooperation nor any Russian interference whatsoever. But the political elites of Europe were interfering, and that quite directly.
They, even now I believe, are counting on the fact that after the midterm elections in the United States Congress, in the autumn of next year, the political landscape will somewhat shift and change, and their traditional allies will then appear, and they will be able to exert significantly more pressure on President Trump.
That is why they are acting this way, anticipating shifts in the political landscape of the United States, especially with the upcoming congressional elections. The president of Russia possesses significant powers, but I am convinced that these threats we will eliminate.
And everyone must understand this and be fully cognizant of the fact that actions of this nature will simply lead to an unprecedented escalation of the conflict and will elevate it to a completely different level, expanding it into a full-scale armed conflict. It's actually a utilitarian purpose to raise insurance premiums. This will not, this will not lead to the expected result ultimately. It will not, it will not disrupt any supplies. In the end, it will only create additional threats. A response from our side will certainly follow.
But tensions surged after Mark Rutte issued a stark warning in Germany, saying Russia could attack a NATO country within the next 5 years. Rutte claimed Moscow is already escalating a covert campaign against Western societies, urging Europe to prepare for a conflict on a scale unseen for generations. Britain's top military chief says the country must be prepared for a future where more citizens may be called upon to fight. Chief of the Defense Staff, Richard Knighton, warned that the world has become significantly more dangerous, demanding greater readiness across British society. Knighton singled out Russia as a central concern, describing it as a massive, increasingly technically sophisticated, and highly combat-experienced military force.
Sons and daughters, colleagues, veterans will all have a part to play, to build, to serve, and if necessary, to fight. And more families will know what sacrifice for our nation means. That's why it's so important that we do explain the changing threat and the need to stay ahead of it. While I've argued that Russia's campaign in Ukraine has so far been a strategic failure, with NATO bigger, more united, stronger, and spending increased amounts on rearmament, we should be under no illusions that Russia has a massive, increasingly technically sophisticated, and now highly combat-experienced military. The war in Ukraine and Russia's track record shows Putin's willingness to target neighboring states, including their children and civilian populations. The Russian leadership has made clear that it wishes to challenge, limit, divide, and ultimately destroy NATO. In former President Medvedev's words, aspiring to the disappearance of Ukraine and the disappearance of NATO, preferably both. In reality, other than proximity, the threat in the UK isn't really any different to the threat in Germany, for example. And unless we're able to raise awareness and stimulate the conversation with society about the risks, we can't expect the rest of government, society, and industry to act or bear the costs. War is enormously costly. And I know I don't need to tell this audience that while the price of peace may be rising, the cost of strong deterrence is still far, far less than the cost of war. We need to end the hollowing out of our armed forces and lead in a stronger and more lethal NATO.
Moscow has dismissed those warnings as hysteria, echoing past rejections of Western intelligence assessments. The exchange comes as U.S. President Donald Trump continues efforts to broker an end to Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, launched in February 2022. As diplomacy strains and rhetoric hardens, the line between deterrence and escalation appears increasingly fragile, raising fresh fears of a wider confrontation across Europe.